part 32 of The Boy at the Back of the Class. Some days that you never ever want to forget, like birthdays and school trip days and adventure days. There are other days when you want to forget everything that ever happened, like when a bully bullies you or grown-ups tell you off for doing something you didn't do, or when someone you love most in the world suddenly dies. Then there are rollercoaster days. Those are days when one moment you're happy that you feel like it's your birthday, but the next you feel so sad that you want to hide in your bed until everything is over. That Friday, the day after we had learned about the worldwide whispers, was a rollercoaster day. After the morning register, Mrs. Khan suddenly told everyone to leave their things on their desk because we had to go to an emergency school assembly. We only ever had a school assembly if something bad had happened, like a fight or something's been stolen from a teacher. But Josie clapped her hands and asked, "Do you think they found Ahmet's parents already?" That made my heart leap up and felt like it was flying. Maybe the emergency assembly was for that. So I looked over at Ahmet and gave him an excited wave. But the assembly wasn't for that at all. Mrs. Sanders only wanted to tell everyone to be on their best behaviour, even the teachers, because some of the reporters surrounding the school were clearly not going anywhere anytime soon, and had to put the school firmly on the world's radar. Hearing this made everyone sit up straight, just in case there was a giant radar being beamed down from outer space to spy on us. Then Mrs. Saunders said that if anyone spoke to a reporter about me or Tom or Ahmet or asked us questions about what had happened, the police would know and they might be expelled. This made everyone turn around and stare at us, as I could hear Jenny saying loudly, "See, told you it was true. They did break into the Queen's house." And someone else replied, "They should have wore a mask. Then they wouldn't have been caught." But we didn't mind, and Josie and Tom even started acting like famous people and began waving at everyone. But as we were leaving the assembly hall, Brendan the bully pushed past and whispered, "Smelly refugee bag," at Ahmet, and Chris and Liam punched their fists into their hands, which meant they were going to beat us up. Josie thought we should save up all our pocket money and pay one of the bigger bullies to bully him for us. But then Michael said that bullying a bully was silly and that we should just ignore him, so that's what we all agreed to do. Except we couldn't. Because at first break, Brendan the bully started to do something which made me hate him even more than anything I've ever hated in my whole life. Even Beetroot and Mr. Irons. Mrs. Khan says we should never ever hate anyone because hating someone can eat up your insides and give you heart disease. But sometimes you can't help it. And I especially couldn't help it when I heard Brandon the bully and Liam and Chris singing the song they had made up. The song went like this. I got so angry that as soon as I heard it, I shouted at them to shut up and leave Ahmet alone. And so did Michael and Josie and Tom. But that only made them sing it louder and louder and louder, which made Ahmet's face get redder and redder. I looked around for a teacher to tell, but Mr. Irons was the only teacher I could see on duty. I could see right away that he had heard Brandon the bully's song too, but wasn't going to do anything about it. He just stood and watched us with his nose in the air. By the time Brandon the bully had begun to sing the song for the fourth time, I think all of us had forgotten what Mrs. Saunders had said about everybody being on their best behaviour and the giant radar, and about there being lots of reporters everywhere, because suddenly, without even thinking about it, I made a running lunge for Brandon the bully, and Tom and Josie and Michael did the same. We all crashed into each other and, falling on the floor, began punching and kicking Brandon the bully and Liam and Chris just as hard as we could. I think I must have been punched and kicked back too, but I was so angry I couldn't feel it. Ahmet stood frozen onto the floor and watched us, not knowing what to do. But after a few seconds, he roared and jumped on top of Brandon the bully, began to hit him as hard as he could too. The fight didn't last for more than a minute, because a few seconds after we had all fallen to the floor, we could hear a whistle hurrying our way, and clicking noises like camera buttons being pressed, as lots of pairs of hands started to pull us away. We were marching to school and then up the stairs, and the next thing I knew, we were standing in Mrs. Saunders' office being stared at angrily by not only Mrs. Saunders but Mrs. Khan and Miss Hempsey too. I couldn't really hear what they were saying because my ears had become so hot, but I think I heard the words "ashamed," never in the history of the school, and "parents" being said. We had all gotten detention for fighting, even Ahmet, but it wasn't all bad. When my ears had cooled down, Josie told me that when Mrs. Saunders had heard Brendan the bully's song, she had given him and Liam and Chris 2 weeks' detention and said she would be calling their parents too. But it turned out Brendan the bully's punishment was more serious than we could have imagined, because by that evening Brendan the bully and Mr. Irons were breaking the news. On every single channel and in all the weekend papers, headlines like "Video of Bullying Attacking Refugee Boy Sparks Outrage" and "Teacher Stands Aside as School Bully Threatens Refugee Boy" and "School Bully Trash Talks Refugee Child" were everywhere, so that by Monday morning the school was surrounded by even more cameras and reporters and vans with satellite dishes on their roofs than before. Brendan the bully and Liam and Chris didn't come into school for 3 whole days after they had broken the news. And when they did, their parents came with them and made them apologise to Ahmet in front of everyone at the morning assembly. They still had to do the detention every day for 2 weeks too. It made everyone glad they had been caught by the news people. Brandon the bully still looked at Ahmet with a horrible scowl on his face whenever he thought no one could see him. And one time in the lunch hall, he walked up to Ahmet with his fists clenched as if he wanted to punch him. But instead of being scared, Ahmet just looked at him with his lion eyes and grinned. After that, Brendan the bully never went near Ahmet again. And just when we thought things couldn't get any better, that week Mr. Irons and his whistling noise disappeared too, and were never heard of ever again. Boring Miss Stevens had to take over his class, which probably made them just as miserable as they had been before. But no one really cares about that, because now everyone was free to scream and laugh and shout as much as they wanted to at break times again. So we did, except we all screamed and laughed and shouted louder and longer and harder than we have ever done before. Because when you're playing with your friends and don't have bullies to worry about anymore, that's exactly what you should be doing.